Welcome to This Issue. I'm Lisa Savage, and I'm here today with Bruce Gagnon, coordinator of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. Bruce blogs at Organizing Notes, offering his own reflections on organizing and the state of America's declining empire. Recently, he engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience, along with me and 7 other peace activists. The Aegis 9 were arrested at the so-called christening of a warship by General Dynamics at the Bath Iron Works shipyard on April 1st, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Bruce, thank you for being willing to answer some of my questions.
Thank you for doing the show today.
My pleasure. Let's start right off with the fact that much has been made of the alleged ties between the new administration in Washington, D.C. and Russia. Can you discuss why the Democratic Party and its media outlets have made such a big deal of this, and what you think the underlying truth is?
Well, I think there's several things working here. Number one, I think the Democrats are trying to distract people from their abysmal election crisis, their losses, tremendous losses across the country in the election. They couldn't retake the Senate, they lost the White House, and largely that's because they don't really stand for anything anymore. They don't really fight for working people. They've really thrown in with the big corporations. They get all their money. And so this whole Russia thing, that there's no, Senator Feingold from California recently said there's nothing yet to, proving any election hacking or anything else by the Russians. So it's all distraction. But secondly, there's something bigger going on here. Because of climate change and the melting of the Arctic ice, they're now going to be able to drill in the Arctic for oil and natural gas. So what country on the planet has the largest land border with the Arctic Sea? And as it turns out, that happens to be Russia. Some years ago, the Rand Corporation came out with a study saying that we've got to break Russia up into pieces, balkanize Russia, in order for our oil corporations to have better access and control of the Arctic drilling process. So I think what's happening today is that Russia's being demonized, and we know that when we saw Saddam Hussein demonized, weapons of mass destruction, shock and awe in 2003. They didn't have any, well, that's okay. And now look at the mess we have. Gaddafi in Libya, demonized, then the attack. Now Libya's a mess. And so the same thing is happening to Russia. And NATO is expanding up to the borders of Russia. The United States is deploying missile defense systems right on the borders of Russia, something that could never have happened during the height of the Cold War. And so all of this is intended for regime change in Moscow. And so that's why I think Putin's being demonized, and I think that's why Russia's being encircled. And so there must be a distraction. There must be a justification to get the American people to support all of this. And so I think that's what's happening.
Sounds like a scary plan. I'd like to fact check something you just said. You mentioned Senator Feingold. Did you mean Senator Dianne Feinstein of California?
I sure did.
I thought you might. I grew up in California.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
I think she was a San Francisco city councilor when I was living there last.
There you go.
Also, I'm reminded that Maine Senator Angus King is taking a very active role in the Arctic coastline, exploiting of resources there and fossil fuels. Is that something that you want your Maine senator to be helping the corporations do?
Well, actually, as it turns out, Senator King's been one of the leading demonizers of Russia and Putin during this recent months. And he's been a big advocate for, the business opportunities of shipping through the Arctic now that the ice is melting. Look what we can do, and look at the role Maine can play, and we can build icebreakers at Bath Iron Works. So he's tied into this whole thing in a big, big way. A guy that used to talk about climate change, that it was a real problem, now is talking about the advantages, the business opportunities involved. So, yeah, I think that's really problematic.
The demagogue with the bad hair there in the White House has continued Obama's pivot to Asia, threatening North Korea, stationing missile defense right on China's borders, building warships like the Zumwalts that are built in Bath and that then go into the South China Sea. What do you think is to be gained from our military threatening China?
Well, I think it's more the same thing, similar to the Russia situation. For some years now, there's been growing unity between Russia and China. They're integrating their economies in a big way. They're talking about the new Silk Road, a trading route beginning in China, running all the way through through China into Siberia and then throughout Russia, and then heading also to Europe. And so it's an economic strategy to really bring together Russia, China, and Europe. That's one reason. Another reason why the U.S. is demonizing Russia so badly is because the U.S. wants to block this from happening. At the same time, Russia and China have created a new international economic forum called BRICS. Mm-hmm. BRICS, B-R-I-C-S. It stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And it's a challenge to the IMF and the World Bank, the West's money lending institutions. Uh-huh. Now, when the IMF and the World Bank make a loan to a third world country, they always make certain demands. You have to privatize, sell off all of your national assets, your resources to corporations. You have to have austerity cuts, get rid of social spending. Mm-hmm. Well, BRICS, under the leadership of Russia and China, is saying we're not going to do that to third world countries. We're not going to squeeze them and bleed them and force them to sell off their assets. We're going to make loans to them and treat them in a good way. Well, this is a real challenge to the U.S., to the Western bankers, to the IMF and the World Bank. And so China then also becomes an enemy to the West. And so that's why we see the demonization of China, and also now we see this encirclement, this military encirclement. Just as it's happening to Russia, it's also happening to China. So I think what's happening, the U.S. sees the train coming, says we better roll the dice here. We better try to take down Russia and China while we still can before they get too strong. This is provocative. It's dangerous. It's highly expensive to the American taxpayers, all this military expansion. And it could lead to World War III and the end of life on this planet, because if we go to war with Russia and China, it's going to go nuclear just like that.
Very concerning. Let's switch our focus to the Middle East a little bit. The ongoing tragedy, a bloodbath in Syria, and the historic refugee crisis that it has caused, it still seems to be escalating with no resolution in sight. How do you see this conflict? Is it a civil war? Is it a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia? What is the U.S.-NATO role in this particular disaster for the people of Syria?
We have to go back to the origins of it, and there we have two sources. One is WikiLeaks cables, State Department cables that they exposed to the public. Mm-hmm. And the other is an article by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that was in Politico about a year or so ago. Mm-hmm. And both of those sources indicate that Qatar approached approached Syria and said, we want to build a pipeline through your country to move our natural gas. Syria refused, and immediately, both those two sources tell us that the CIA began the campaign to destroy the Assad government, and began demonizing it, and began arming ISIS. Now, this is hard for a lot of people to understand.
So you're saying the CIA began arming ISIS?
Yes.
Just to make it clear, okay.
With the help of Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey, Qatar, and Jordan. They began funding and arming and directing ISIS. Where did all those white Toyota pickup trucks suddenly come from?
Good question.
Right? Where did all the money come from to do all that? And so what we found is that quickly ISIS began to take territory. They took initially the oil exploration parts of Syria. They began illegally taking oil out of the country and shipping it through Turkey and then selling it and then using that money to expand ISIS. So all of this is a violation of international law. We're basically trying to overthrow a duly elected government. That's illegal under international law. And now Saudi Arabia, to defend themselves, invited Russia and they invited Iran to come in and help them defend themselves against ISIS. The United States says we're against ISIS, but the truth of the matter is just in recent days the U.S. has been bombing Saudi Arabian military has been bombing Syrian military inside of the country of Syria. All right.
This is Assad's military that they're bombing.
So here we have Assad trying to defend his own people, protect against ISIS that is being supported by the U.S. and these other outside forces. And the United States is bombing Syria as they try to defend themselves. This is incredible. This is unbelievable. And again, a total violation of international law. So the U.S. wants to take down Syria, and then it wants to take down Iran. And then after that, the United States wants to take down Russia. And so Russia has intervened because it sees that if Syria falls, then it will be much easier to take down Iran. And then if Iran falls, then the United States and NATO are sitting on the doorstep of Russia. If you look at a map, look at U.S. bases now in Afghanistan and other parts of the Middle East. They now have Iran completely surrounded. And so this is, sadly, the agenda. Now, again, this is hard for the American people to swallow. It's hard for them to believe because the corporate media give us nothing about any of this. All we hear about is the evils of Syria, the evils of Russia, the evils of Iran. So the United States has really set in motion a very dangerous, very dangerous and illegal program.
I don't remember Congress voting to declare war on Syria. Did I miss something, or we just now dispense with those kind of constitutional duties of our branches of the federal government?
I think they've been dispensed with. We now, our country is not a democracy. It's run by a corporate oligarchy. The corporations that control the banks, the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies, the oil companies, and the military-industrial complex, they run the country. Congress is really a tool of those corporations. They put people in power that will do their bidding for them, give them what they want. And so the idea that Congress declares war, that's outdated and gone.
You also referenced the media a minute ago. Why is it that the people of this country don't receive useful information from the free press operating under the First Amendment anymore? Or do they, and it's corporate media outlets that dominate the airwaves and don't bring much truth to the discussion? How do you see that?
During my career as an organizer, I've seen the consolidation of TV, radio, newspapers, and now the internet under the control of corporations. Just a handful, literally one handful of corporations own all these media outlets. And it didn't used to be that way 30, 40 years ago. It was a whole different story.
The U.S. seems to have drawn closer to Saudi Arabia in recent weeks. We had a state visit from the current U.S. president who was photographed dancing around with swords and communing with some sort of glowing orb surrounded by Saudi princes. What is really going on? Do you see this as more of the same in U.S. foreign policy with regard to Saudi Arabia, or is this a significant shift?
Well, I think, we have to remember that our country was formed based on a rebellion against monarchy. The United States had a revolution to break away from the monarchy of Great Britain. And now it's so ironic that the United States has literally thrown itself into the arms of the head-chopping monarchy of Saudi Arabia. And we are now providing them with massive weapons amounts, making a lot of money for the weapons corporations here in America. They're very happy with that. And we're supporting them in their terrible war against Yemen, where they're killing many thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of innocent people. Children are dying of starvation.
And
There's cholera epidemics. That's right. And so we've now joined with them because the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel have created a pact to control the entire Middle East on behalf of the corporate interests. And so that's why they're trying to take down anybody that gets in the way. And even just recently, Qatar, that was on their side, but Qatar was saying, well, we can't be so aggressive towards Iran. Qatar borders Iran. They have a joint natural gas field between those two countries. So Qatar was trying to say, well, let's be friendly with Iran. But no, that wasn't acceptable to the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And so they're now going after Qatar. So they're going after anybody in the Middle East that stands in the way of complete corporate domination. So that's the bottom line.
I think one of the demands on Qatar is that they shut down Al Jazeera as well, because that's where the Al Jazeera media.
That's right. Qatar created Al Jazeera, yeah.
I think that you answered this earlier, but I'll just say it quickly. Why have we been in Afghanistan for so long? Again, we seem to be sending troops to Afghanistan. This is the longest running hot war the U.S. has had. It never seems to actually accomplish its stated goals. Do you see this as part of the grand scheme to surround Iran and be in the proximity of Russia and China? Is there something else going on there?
Well, I think all of those things are the top reasons. Plus, think of the money. Not only are there tens of thousands of U.S. troops and now more being sent there on top of that, but there are also tens of thousands of corporate contractors hired to carry out many of the jobs there of the U.S. military. So there's a huge money drain from the American taxpayers into these endless wars, in this case in Afghanistan. But there's a couple other things too. Yes, they're right there neighboring Iran, setting up essentially permanent bases. They're also in the region close to Russia and China. Out of that has come the arming and training of a lot of these ISIS operators that are now working with the United States in places like Syria, in places like Libya, and other places around the world. The U.S. is now even sending these ISIS people to Philippines, because they don't like the new president of Philippines, because he had the audacity to say that he was going to lean more towards China rather than the United States. So all over the world, countries are beginning to say, we don't really want to work with the United States anymore. And when they say that, they get put on the bad list.
Sure.
But something else is going on in Afghanistan too that also must be recognized. Number one, they have a lot of natural resources, various minerals that are very valuable as minerals decline on the planet. So that's one reason to be there and to control that landmass. But also the growing of the poppy seeds. That is a major source for the creation of heroin that is then used, then sent all over the world. And it's long been known that the CIA, all the way back to the Iran-Contra scandals, where the CIA was selling heroin in LA and the black community, using the profits to buy weapons to arm the Contras in Nicaragua after the Congress of the United States said it was illegal to do so. So that was the whole Oliver North, Ronald Reagan underneath the table program. So the CIA has long been known to be one of the major drug dealers in the world, exporting heroin then out of that whole region of Central Asia.
Well, Maine is certainly suffering through its own end of the heroin epidemic right now here today. You mentioned Israel a moment ago as part of this, I don't want to call it the axis of evil, but maybe the triangle of evil of the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Israel trying to control the region. This year marked the 50th anniversary of Israel annexing the West Bank and Gaza, and constructing settlements on those stolen lands is just galloping ahead. It seems to be, no matter which president we get, a polite, well-spoken one, one that says a lot of boorish and ignorant things, we still, as the U.S., continue to support and fund violent apartheid as practiced by Israel and Palestine. Why does regime change in the U.S. have no effect on those policies, do you think?
Well, I think that's a really important question. Many people say it's because of the power of AIPAC. AIPAC, help me, stands for
American Israeli Political Action Committee.
American Israeli Political Action Committee, AIPAC, that before every election, both parties, congressmen, senators, presidential candidates, go to AIPAC meetings and throw themselves on the mercy of this American Israeli Political Action Committee. And so that is driving our foreign policy in the Middle East, no doubt about it.
What is it that it makes AIPAC so powerful? I'm sure many governments would like to influence U.S. foreign policy.
Well, I think is a lot of money. Cynthia McKinney, former congressman from Atlanta, Georgia area, told the story that when she became a congresswoman, she was given a sort of set of instructions that she would follow the policy of AIPAC, and if she didn't, she'd be taken out. She was eventually taken out, as were a couple other black members of Congress from the South who refused to follow the dictates of AIPAC. And so I think most politicians in America are afraid that if they don't follow the AIPAC line, they'll be taken out. People will be run against them. A lot of money will be raised. The commercials will be put on television that will demonize them in the eyes of the public, and they will be defeated in the next election. Israel has a plan. They call it Greater Israel. They want to expand. They want to take territory from Syria. They want Lebanon. They want even parts of Egypt. And so this is a plan that is very controversial and very dangerous and, again, very provocative in the region. And the United States is basically supporting that. Now Saudi Arabia has even signed on, essentially, to support this Greater Israel program.
What advice do you have for our audience to counter this downhill slide of our domestic economy, which is increasingly based on nothing much more than building and exporting so-called security and weapons of mass destruction? What can a concerned person do at this point to make a difference, Bruce?
Well, I think first of all, we have to end our illusions about America. It was difficult for me. I grew up in a military family. I was a young Republican for Nixon in 1968. I joined the Air Force myself in 1971. So I was a young believer. I was a total patriot. And it wasn't until I went in the Air Force during the Vietnam War that I began to read things like the Pentagon Papers, the government's own secret history of the war in Vietnam, how they lied to sell the war. And that really shattered my illusions. And ever since then, I've been trying to learn as much as I can about what's really going on. So I think you have to have an inquisitive, open mind in order to really find out what's going on. There's lots of sources out there in the alternative world that are not mainstream. And then you have to begin to call for some serious changes, like the conversion of the military-industrial complex. You know, our real problem that we have today is called climate change and disparity of the economy in the world, where the rich are getting richer and the poor and the working class are falling into poverty. We've got to change that. And the way we do that is stop these endless wars, stop selling weapons, build rail systems and solar and wind power and tidal power, creating more jobs than we would get from weapons, and begin to have a foreign policy that is friendly to the world rather than one that is kicking everyone's rear end. Thank
you. So Bruce, you and I will be in West Bath District Court tomorrow morning at 8 6:30 sharp for our Aegis 9 disposition hearing, because we were arrested together for an act of nonviolent civil disobedience at General Dynamics Bath Iron Works shipyard, along with 7 others. And we'll be there with with the attorney Logan Perkins, who's advising us on our civil disobedience defense. And I think we would like to encourage supporters to come to the courthouse. That's on June 28th if they're able, and we'll hope for a jury trial later in the year, maybe end of summer or in the fall. And I noticed that you published a poem on your blog this week. I know you sometimes do write those on Sundays, and you said in it, "It's time to get up off our knees to face the rising tide of austerity fueled by endless war making." So thank you for being willing to get up off your knees and to help others understand that, that's what's needed now. And thank you for being here, Bruce.
Well, thank you for coming on the show and interviewing me.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. Let me just say that this won't be broadcast in time for people to come tomorrow, but there will be a succession of hearings before the court, even before the trial. So this will run easily into September, and so there will be opportunities for people to come and learn why these people got arrested.
And I know that your blog, Organizing Notes, you're a blogger on Blogspot, is a very good source of information about much of what we've discussed today, and particularly if people wanted to follow the case of the Aegis 9 and support us along the way, that would be a good place to stay up to date.
And what is your blog called?
And my blog is called Went to the Bridge, with 2 as a numeral 2.
Went to the Bridge.
Went to the Bridge, and I also blog about sort of the ongoing wars against the poor at home and abroad, and organizing to resist that direction of our country. I think both you and I are rather idealistic types who will go down to our last breath saying, this is not right. If you look at history, I was a history major. We're not on a path. You do not want to end up on where the path that we're on right now is leading to as a nation.
I still, I took that oath of office when I joined the military, and I took it seriously to protect our country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I believe in my heart that what I'm doing is patriotic, and I'm trying to help protect the country by trying to tell the truth as best I can discern it. And I think that's what we're all supposed to do. To answer your earlier question, we all have to get engaged, because we're talking now about the literal survival of our children and grandchildren. I have a son. He recently got married. There's a possibility they'll have a child at some point. I want to protect the future generations. That's my big agenda in this world today.
And we're out of time. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for watching.